artist design work and advancing the actual monument. Am I missing something?
No,
Not at all.
There's a good answer for the set, so I'm glad you mentioned it.
Okay.
Yeah, not at all. And I'm more than happy to fill you in on that. So what we have done so far is we've gone through an artist selection process, and we have had the generous support from the Fort Monroe Foundation. And so the entire artist selection process, where we've actually paid a stipend to the artist after we selected them and got them paid for their travel expenses to come here so that the public could meet them and we could go through a selection process. That was all funded by the Fort Monroe Foundation. And so we have been very careful, and we are doing our very, very best to protect that $500,000 for as long as we can. We are now entering into the contract phase with the artist. The artist contract will also include the actual construction of the monument, and we can't sign a contract which we don't have the money for yet. We don't know how much it's going to be, so we've broken the artist contract up into phases. And the first phase is what we're calling a listening tour. And we estimate that that first phase is going to be about $20,000, including his time, his travel, his expenses, and his conceptual design, which will be produced after the listening tour. And so the foundation has agreed to that $20,000, and so we're moving forward with that. Once we get the conceptual design done, then we can really go to work on how are we going to actually, I mean, how much is this memorial going to cost us, and how much can we do? I would imagine that you're probably talking about something that is more along the lines of, $1.5 million all the way up to $5 million if you were to do the entire park. And so then it's going to be, once we have the design of the memorial project, then what we will do is sit down with our team of architects, landscape architects, and engineers, and figure out what would the park concept look like, and how does it incorporate into the 7-mile trail, and then we can even come up with better numbers. So it's going to be a process. This isn't going to happen very quickly, and it shouldn't. It took 400 years to get here. But we have a really good plan laid out that we're more than willing to modify as people come up with better ideas.
Well, just for the record, because I know there's a lot of public interest in it, and I know because you keep us apprised that you have regular conversations with the governor's administration. I'm assuming that the governor's administration is comfortable with this $500,000 being used for the design vis-a-vis, instead of being set aside as a down payment on the actual monument.
So that's a very interesting question. When the $500,000 we were first notified of that, and we went to the budget to go and look for it, it's very interesting. If you were to compare this type of a project with something that was done, for example, at Browns Island, where they did the Freedom Memorial or Freedom Monument, there's a lot of legislation that tells you how to do that. You know, who's going to be on the commission, how many members are going to be on the commission, and I'm sort of shooting this out there, but it's things like that. They have staff in Richmond that manage this. We have no description whatsoever. It's just simply a directive from the governor's office plan to do this. And so, once again, my strategy as your executive director is to protect the $500,000 for as long as I can, and then use it strategically to leverage other money. So whether the $500,000 actually gets put towards the actual foundry in the creation of the monument, or whether it gets put towards the engineering design, I don't know. And we can certainly have, this will be a great discussion to have at the board retreat, because that's about when we'll really be needing to decide how do we go forward and what can we do at the first phase. And so that could be a really good discussion for our board retreat.
Well, might I suggest that, I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench into anything, but the way it's programmed in the CIP, if I understand it correctly, is engineering only, and it has the whole $500,000 going to engineering only. And that makes me a little uncomfortable without working through some of these larger questions, frankly. And not that I don't trust you and John, but it's the first I'm kind of hearing. I had always assumed, and perhaps it was my wrong assumption, that the money was really intended to be towards the actual monument itself. And I don't want to do something that, causes problems and all that. And if you feel comfortable that we're good, that's fine, but it may be that when we need more money, it's, well, where's that $500,000 we gave you? And that's why I'm trying to seek comfort. And if you're suggesting perhaps this is a conversation for our board retreat, maybe we could adopt a CIP, which is African Landing Memorial Park, and not say engineering only or whatever, but leave it as flexible money to do what you're suggesting, which is to leverage it where it needs to best go, as opposed to being that specific.
So I hear everything you're saying, and that's a wonderful suggestion. We can find ways to massage this so that we get more comfortable with it. One of the things that I've been looking at is, as we start talking about fundraising, I don't know whether it'd be more difficult to raise money for the infrastructure. It might be, I'm going to make this assumption.
Certainly, it's easier to do the design. I mean, I get it.
It's easier to raise money for the actual physical structure than it is to raise money for the infrastructure that goes into it. And so I'm assuming, and this could be wrong on my part, but I'm assuming that if we were to end up using the $500,000 to provide the foundation and infrastructure support for the memorial, and we had a donor which came in and donated actually for the structure itself, then that would be acceptable. But we can I will certainly be communicating with the board and also with the governor's chief of staff and make sure that we do this the right way.
Well, and I take your point. I think you're right. I think in your assessment that donors usually want to do the real thing and not the foundational work and all of that. But in terms of timing and whatnot, if it's, you know, does it count as a match or whatever if we align that better? And again, I'm not trying to get too much in the weeds. I just, if I'm being asked to vote on something and it's this specific and I'm struggling with some of these questions, I just have to be frank, I'm a little unclear about this one. And all the rest I'm good with, but.
This was an unintended consequence. That comment was really meant to address the $100,000 in the first year, not all $500,000.
Oh, because it.
But I understand how you.
Look at the detail on
Sure.
page 8-041, and I was looking at the detail page, not just the summary sheet.
That was.
The detail page says engineering only for the whole $500,000.
Yeah, no, that, we wouldn't spend the $500,000 in engineering.
Well,
I think I'd be happy if you wanted to amend the CIP to strike any reference to engineering.
And I'm comfortable if you're talking only 100,000 of 500, you still have 400,000 to leverage the donation matches and things of that nature. But again, my concern was page 8, the detail page. So
yeah, and
if you need me to make a formal motion,
I'd be comfortable with that.
you know, that's fine. Or if you all just say that that's what this is intended and we don't need to do a formal motion, I'm fine with that too. But I just would like that clear one way or the other. And if you prefer a motion, I so move that we make page 8-041 clear that this is an African Landing Memorial project with 100,000 in fiscal 2020.
Why don't we just delete engineering only, just refer
Or just
to it as
delete
the
engineering only. Okay. I so move.
Any further discussion?
I just would like to say I welcome any discussion and assistance with how to navigate through this project. So thank you very much for this help.
Before we leave the CIP, obviously everybody's heard that we've got a $27 million shortfall against the $36 million plan for that line item. When do we start committing $2021, and when will we know, and will that mesh with the General Assembly action on our budget request? And the reason I'm asking is if we don't get those dollars, I actually think we need to step back and revisit the priorities. You know, what gets dropped and what gets, we need to be informed and that's an input on what gets postponed, not dropped, what gets postponed and what gets included.
Well, as we discussed at the Finance Committee meeting, we'll keep, the $9 million is unallocated right now. It's a little bit of a, if you ask for 27 million, but there's 9 million still in your bank account, you're probably not going to get 27 million until they say, well, why can't you spend the 9 million first, come back in a year or two? So that's the conundrum of the budget cycle process. So while these projects are listed as allocating for certain projects, and I'm sure the city manager can confirm this, you start out the year believing that these are the highest priorities, but something comes up that's more critical and suddenly you come back to the governing body and say, as we did in February of last year and said, the Building 96 project can now be funded with DPPA money, that we didn't have to borrow the money, and so we came back to the board and amended the CIP. And I think that would be, as we get closer to these development proposals and understand what those projects are going to be and which projects are going to proceed, then I expect to come back to the board with a revised CIP so the board has a clear understanding of what the new priority projects are.
So said differently, saying the same thing differently, we've got a 2021 budget with $18 million of spending that we don't have full funding for. And it's my understanding. And so you will come back to us before you begin committing to the $2021.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Dr. Ross?
Are you going to be talking, Glenn, later more about the Africans? Okay.
So, any further discussion of the motion that's on the table?
So was that a motion to approve
Was it
the whole
a-
CIP
I think-
or just?
With
yeah.
the amendment.
Yeah.
With the amendment.
Yeah, so the motion is to approve the capital improvement plan as amended to clarify that the 500,000 includes 100,000 for engineering only, but the 500,000 will not be exclusively used for engineering or design. It will go towards the African American Memorial, and that kind of more inclusive language will describe the capital improvement plan. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are none opposed, which passes unanimously. So the next item on the agenda